Welcome back to Composition, and it's Alice. My name is Barney. I'm a classical composer, and this is a channel for composers as well as performers that are interested in composition. Orchestration for beginners is for anyone who wants to compose and orchestrate their first orchestral work. I actually had to move to Paris, France to get the proper training to do so. I studied for 5 years in harmony, which was the principal means to get better at orchestration, though I also took some orchestration classes. And with this training, I was able to reorchestrate my first symphony, Help with the Orchestra, without needing a teacher. In How to French Learn Orchestration, I'm going to show you the specific method that we use to get better at orchestration. And today's episode, we're going to talk about planning out your orchestration. Let's begin. So we're going to continue with Chabrier. And the first thing you want to do is a harmonic analysis. Now, quick mention to note about harmonic analysis for harmony French style or orchestration in French style. So when it comes to Mozart, that you have to do like a clear Roman numeral analysis is very easy to do and it's very accurate and it will really, really help you. Once you get to Debussy and Ravel, it becomes more opaque. It's not always functional harmony, like Debussy might have parallel fifths, for example. Like, how do you really describe that? But the most important is that you're able to understand what's happening, not so much intellectually, but like you just understand how the chords are functioning so that you can make good decisions when you proceed to orchestrate. So instead of using like Roman numeral analysis, I'm going to just describe the chords. So I see an F sharp minor chord going to a G sharp minor chord, a G sharp minor chord going to an A major chord, and an F sharp minor chord going to an E major chord. If I were to try to understand this through functional harmony, it really doesn't work. So you would have 2 to a 3 to a 4 to a 6. That doesn't really say anything. So the important thing is to just like understand what's going on. Now, one quick précision, which is in French. If you are following my French harmony exercises series, I always encourage you to put the Roman numerals. That's because it's hyper-functional harmony that's designed to get you ready for orchestration and for fugue. So just make sure you keep the disciplines separate in your mind. Of course, when you proceed to compose, don't try to apply the rules because then you'll get a very safe, not very interesting composition. Okay, so now we've done that quick harmonic analysis. This doesn't take that long, right? It was a short passage. I want to break down the musical ideas because it can be kind of daunting, like what's going on, what's most important. There's got to be, with tonal music and just music in general, there's always a hierarchy. It's not, equality is tyranny, okay? It cannot be that everything's equal. Just certain things are just more important. And if you want to get better orchestration, you really got to have priorities and you got to recognize what's big and then what's small. So idea 1, we have an F sharp minor chord going to a G sharp minor chord. So what's important to me is notice the outer voices. This comes directly from harmony, right? In harmony studies in the French style, you're doing voicing above and below. So you have the soprano and you get the bass, or you have the bass and you get the soprano, but you can see right away how this directly applies to orchestration. So notice the outer voices. We have F sharp and A, then going to a G sharp and G sharp, so going to an octave. Notice that Chabrier filled in all the notes of the chord. So this is something that may not be possible when you're orchestrating, because if you do want to fill in all the notes of the chord, then you might have a really dense orchestration that can be quite unpleasant and overbearing. However, what I will say is the spacing can be really important. So if you notice in the arpeggios that there's some intentional gaps, then when you proceed to orchestrate, you often will want to preserve that. It's definitely the case with Debussy and Ravel. It will not be, the harmony is not the same when you do not preserve the spacing. Then we have idea number 2, and again, we want to look at the outer voices. So we have G sharp and D sharp between the outer voices, and then we have A to C sharp. So we're getting to that nice, beautiful major third between the outer voices. So when you proceed to orchestrate, there are things that get shifted, to different registers, get filled in, taken out maybe, third cases. But definitely this outer relationship, I think, is pretty integral, especially for French composers, but probably all composers really. So I would be very hesitant to change that. So if I want to put it in a different register, add more partials, I would still want that getting from that fifth G sharp, D sharp to that contracting into a major for the A and C sharp, even if I did more doublings in the lower register. Now this brings us to the double bass, or the bass in general. Is many times when we orchestrate, we're going to double down the octave. Now sometimes this works, sometimes it will not work, but it's something you should just have the back of your head that I may need to reinforce the space in a lower register. Then I have idea number 3. So again, picking the outer voices, which I cannot emphasize enough, the rapidity of which I just automatically, without thinking, just getting those outer voices when I want to do a harmonic analysis. This is baked in from harmony, from doing hundreds of exercises. Now, you don't have to do hundreds. I think if you do 20 or 30 of excellence, really like you put the best foot forward, then this will probably get baked into your thing. You cannot not think in this manner. Okay, so we have F sharp to F sharp, and then it expands to E and G sharp. So we have a really nice tender major third between the outer voices for the ending of the piece. So definitely orchestrationally, I really probably want to preserve it. Now, maybe in theory, I could add another partial much higher as a harmonic, like a B somewhere, I don't know. But definitely, I would want the listener to kind of perceive this as kind of the de facto melody. Now, one orchestration difficulty that you want to anticipate is notice that we have the treble clef in the left hand. This I find quite difficult because, not because I can't read treble clef, but because many times it means that there's not a true bass. So we assume the left hand is doing the bass, but if we see that the treble clef, there may not be a real bass. There may be implied bass, which I have encountered in orchestration of style of Mozart. Well, maybe I'll show you that another day. But if there is a bass and we double down the octave, it's still going to be in a very elevated register, because you got to think the double bass is written an octave higher than it sounds. So this may require some extra care. Now we want to understand the accompaniment. So we got the melody first, and then we got the accompaniment. It could be another way around. If you have an accompaniment that's very complicated or something, that may come first. I'm not saying it has to be this way, but you want, il faut cibler within French. You need to target the things that are most important. So we have arpeggios in the accompaniment, and notice that all the notes are filled in except for the very bottom of the chord for the opening fifth, and that's more for acoustical reasons, because when you have tight intervals in lower register, it's just unpleasant. It's just very dark and heavy, even on a piano. But thereafter, he fills in every single note of the arpeggio. So this means to me is that it's more about the effect of an arpeggio, getting from one elevation to the next. There's not a particular spacing. It'll be different if there are intentional gaps, like as you get higher, there was like a fifth gap or a third gap here and there. That might be an indication that there's a certain spacing that Chabrier is really thinking about. Here, I think it's just more functional, just to have an arpeggio that clarifies the harmony. Now you need to plan your orchestration, okay? So melody. Not totally sure right away what the melody is going to be, but the de facto melody is going to be the top voice. So the top note is probably going to be the melody, I would assume. Many different ways to realize it. Well, not that many. But if I put the top note as the melody, I probably want it in an instrument that's imposing from the others. So the other notes of the chord will be in a different instrument, maybe in a different group. So let's say I put it in the oboe, then the other instruments for the chords might be the strings, so there's a clear sense of contrast, or at the very least, it'll be not another oboe. Now let's talk about the sustained chords. So my just instant gut, and I don't even know how much harmony I needed to get here, even just a couple orchestration classes, is the strings. I think actually here orchestration classes will get you cette façon de réfléchir within French, this way of thinking, more so than the harmony. The harmony is just more about the doublings. Because how are you going to have like a balanced chord if it's another group? Because the strings are really able to control the volume. They're really able to balance well, to blend well, to get a homogeneous sound, so that when you have that melody and contrast, it's really clear, it's really stable. If I have the woodwinds, first of all, there's a question, do I have enough? Because woodwinds, if you have woodwinds at 2, so you have maximum, you're going to have 8. But the bassoons, keep in mind, do not play in the same register of the upper woodwinds. Now, they can play in their upper register and get closer if it's the bottom of the chord, but they're thinner sounding. Also, there's a lot of imbalance in the woodwinds in there. I mean, that's the beauty of them, right? But they're so inconsistent. So the flute, lower register is very weak, can be very pale in the middle of the staff. Oboe, it gets thin as we get above the staff. Clarinet gets, there's just a lot of considerations, a lot of color. It's going to be very dense if you put all the woodwinds. So my impulse is just really not going to work if I put these chords in the woodwinds. For the brass, I hope that is obviously the brass is just not possible because the brass is going to be way too loud. Trumpet on that top of the melody is going to be just way too dramatic. It is not the character required. Now, one exception I would say is maybe for color purposes of color, you might want a trombone or tuba in the lowest register, like pianissimo or something. But that's not my. When I first start trying to orchestrate the playing out the orchestration, I'm thinking big picture. All right, so now let's talk about the arpeggios. So for the arpeggio, it's going to be either strings or it's going to be a harp. So the reason for that is because it spans a very wide register. What instruments can really do that consistently without like clear defects in the sound, clear discrepancies in the strength or weakness of where they're playing? So the strings, if you're going to use the strings, you're going to have to think about a switchover point. What I mean by that is, let's say you start with the double bass and the cello in the lowest part, and then at some point the viola takes over, and then the violin 2 and the violin 1. This is, it's a very obvious effect, I would say. We could maybe talk about in another episode, but I don't know how important it is to really the fundamentals of orchestration. But if you do this switchover effect, you're going to have to make a critical decision. Which point are they going to switch over? Like which note is the note? Probably like a nondescript register, something subtle. The other thing is, are they going to switch at the unison? So when the viola finishes its note, what coincides with the first note of the violin 2, so the unison, which could cause a noticeable heaviness maybe if it's not done well. Or when the viola is done, immediately the next note is going to be the violin 2, so no overlap. These are just some of the things that you would have to think about. That's a secondary issue in terms of the change of power. But the first thing is who is going to do this arpeggio. Now, another consideration I have is this very ending. It gets very high, very delicate. So to me, it's a no-brainer. There's no way I'm going to have all the first violins doing that. It's just going to be hard to coordinate. Not forget about intonation. It's just going to be very difficult because there might be a ritardando or something. It'd be very unreasonable to do this well. So what I'm first thinking is maybe there'll be like a solo first violinist, and I'll just have to decide at what point do they emerge from the first violinist. So a problem that I anticipate, or I can see already, if I'm going to use the strings for the arpeggio going across many registers, then they're not also going to be able to do the sustained chords at the same time. This is why you have to plan out the orchestration, because otherwise you're going to get there and you're going to try it and halfway orchestrate it, and then it's all null and void because you didn't think in advance. So orchestration is, a lot of it is planning in advance. So sometimes you have to do and you suffer and then you realize and you improve the next time. But here we can hopefully take the time to think a little bit more clearly. And so what I'm deciding right now, okay, the arpeggio has to be the harp so that the strings are freed up to the background chords. All right, so now we're going to test out our orchestration. And I have a video, it's been a while, it's a couple months ago I think it's called How to Orchestrate Your Piano Sketches, Test As You Go. Highly recommend checking that out, not right this second, because you don't want to have monkey brain. And you want to compose after this video, I hope, or do something productive. But sometime later, check it out, because it is what I do to orchestrate. I find it very efficient. It may not be for you the first time you orchestrate, because sometimes it's better to just learn the hard way. But if you want to get better and be more efficient, then you really have to test before you commit, so that you don't put all your eggs in one basket. So, choices of instruments. Notice that I didn't put all the instruments of the orchestra. This is partly because of time limitations, but also I don't want to just write all that stuff out if I don't even know I need it. I'm going to use multiple pages. Okay, so I just went for like, what do I know that I might need? So first off, for woodwinds, I don't think I need all the woodwinds, so I just put 2 staves, and that way I can change the clef if necessary for the bassoon. I can use only 1 stave. This is just about having options and having flexibility. So really think about it when you're orchestrating your own piece. Sometimes you're retesting, you don't want to write the whole thing out, but you do need to see something. This is something that you can do. I left space for harp because we talked about, we know for sure I want to do the harp for the arpeggios, and then I kept all the strings because there's just no way I'm not going to be using the strings. Now, as I proceeded to do the melody for, thinking I'd use the woodwinds, some questions emerged. So I started the first one on the oboe, but then if I want to continue the oboe for the next iteration of the melody and the next one, which would be logical, right? It's going to go out of range. So it's already in its upper register. It's a sweet area, but I don't know. Okay. So then you can see in my first preliminary orchestration, I switched the flute. Okay, but maybe that's kind of distracting for the listener. It's nice to have the consistency. You don't want to constantly change it up. Notice for the double bass that I have a pizzicato, okay, and I have it doubling down the octave. Now, a problem that I'm encountering right now is that there's a danger of safe orchestration. So the strings, I know I can realize the harmony is something that's very functional, but what do I do to give life to this music? And this is actually one of the dangers I see with how the French learn orchestration is. There many times, quite frankly, you get an orchestration, it's functional but doesn't say something, and part of the reason is because it's not your work. It's often considered inappropriate to compose new material, especially if you're not fluent in that style. It's considered inappropriate or not acceptable to compose new material, and this is something you will have to do when you're composing. I hope this video gave you some pointers in terms of orchestration and how to get better orchestration. If you have not orchestrated or composed today, please shut off YouTube immediately and get to work. But if you've already done so, then you can head over to school.com/composition to start working on those French harmony exercises. Thank you for watching. Have a great day.